Hello? Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here to talk about our mobile and companion apps. Sorry that we're a little crowded. Actually, I spread the rumor that Richard Sherman is giving autographs in this room, and so I think that kind of boosted attendance a little bit. So my name is Kyle Young. I guess we should go to the slide. There we go. I'm a program manager on the Ax Services Industries team, and for the last few years have been driving some of our investments in mobile applications.
I'm not even on.
Oh, there you go.
Let's see if my mic works here. There it goes. Hi, I'm David Rundy, and I'm a software engineer on the mobile team. That's about it for me.
All right. So the way that works, if there are easy questions, I'll be happy to field those, and if there's hard questions, then David will field the hard questions. So it's kind of a division of labor that we thought was made sense. All right, so we have this exciting slide here. Now, please do take advantage of this slide. There are the people who wrote this slide do have families that want to see their good work out there as well. So take good notice of the legal disclaimer and so forth. So, all right. Let's talk a little bit about our applications and what we built. Let me just get a raise of hands. It's a little hard to tell, but who here has already has needs in terms of whether you're a partner or customer who have requirements and needs for mobile applications, whether they be phone or tablets? Okay, excellent. All right, and then who here have already deployed a variety of mobile solutions? Okay. All right, that's good. So that's helpful. And then what level of familiarity is there with the time, expense, and approvals apps, whether on Windows 8 or on the phones? What level of experience do we have in the room of those apps? Oh, all right. Good. Okay, so plowing some new ground. That's awesome. Okay, so let's jump in to see what we've done. So over the last year, and beginning a little bit before that, but over the last year, we have released the following applications into their respective marketplaces. So for Windows 8, as a tablet app, we have 3 apps that we have released basically from the SI team. Now, there's other work going on in AX. And so you saw in the keynote today, and some of you may have seen the work that the retail guys are doing, and they're making appropriate mobile investments. And then we have other teams in AX that are using the similar pattern that we've used that you will see today to publish out some additional apps, and those teams are making the human resources team and the supply chains team. They have investments they're making, and we're not going to pre-announce work that they've done, and so some of those sessions will be talking about those apps, as well as there's another investment around Business Analyzer as well, which has a more broad-based approach, leveraging the same architecture that we're using that you'll see today, but they are using that architecture to expose BI-based information as well. So there's a variety of investments happening throughout AX. So Windows 8, we have the expenses, timesheets, and approvals apps, and we're going to take a look at those in some amount of detail. And then for the phone, we have released an app that does a similar functionality on Windows, iPhone, and Android, and we will see the versions of those apps as well. And you can see kind of how the apps fit in. And the approach we've taken for the mobile apps is to make them be additive and companion and targeted applications. So a number of the functions like entering timesheets or doing approvals or capturing expenses, you can do largely on Employee Portal, and some of those capabilities are available in the client. And those are a fairly rich, full-featured set of capabilities, allowing for a variety of different business scenarios and so forth. So that's the EP capability. Now, our goal with these apps is not to be an absolute complete replacement for all the functions of EP or all the respective functions in the client. It's to target very targeted experiences for those users who are doing specific functions like timesheets and approvals and expenses and need either a phone capability or a tablet capability. And so again, these are, you'll see a subset of the functionality, and that's by design because these are supposed to be very immersive, targeted experiences. And we can talk about some of the trade-offs we've made as well. So those are the apps that we've released. So let's first of all, let's talk about expense management to begin with. And the story here will begin on the phone. Okay, so we'll start with Windows Phone, and we will go to our trusty Dynamics AX application here on the phone. All right. What's that? Nope, good catch. Let's see. I just need to kill the presentation. There we go. Okay, so we're here on the Windows Phone, and we've gone now to our Dynamics AX application. And because this one is engineered for Windows, and you'll see the adaptations when we look at the other versions of the app, we use a hub concept. And so the first concept you see here are timesheets, and we'll come back to that. And then the second concept here is to capture expenses. So the scenario is that one of the things that our users were telling us is that it'd be really great to have a nice way of just capturing receipts and transactions that I'm going to need later for doing expense reporting. And so we didn't try and do a full-featured app to complete a full expense report on the phone. That experience didn't really test all that well, and based on real estate and so forth. That was a much better fit as a tablet app. But our users wanted to be able to capture receipts in an easy fashion on the phone. So let's say that I've just incurred a transaction expense here. So I go to New Expense. I can then provide relevant information. So I'll default to today's date, or it could have even been, could have been last week. So we can capture something that occurred last week. Let's say that was on Friday. So I'll select that. I'll give this an amount of, pick an amount. In fact, to make sure it's a real demo, give me a 2-digit amount, somebody. 42. Awesome. That's a great thing. So that would cover breakfast here at the Hyatt. So let's see, that's for a meal. And we'll go for breakfast. And some people can type it correctly even. And I could just, I could put the merchant here. So I'll just put the cafe and capture that set of information. Now, it's great to be able to capture the transaction, but also to capture the receipt is a great function. So I just hit the little camera button there, and it's going to allow me to capture this receipt. This is my trusty receipt. I've expensed this several hundred times now. It's how I pay for the equipment for the demos, among other things. And so now you can see that I've captured the receipt. I've captured the transaction information. I'm just going to simply save that. And so now it's going to go write that back to AX, and we'll see what happens to it in just a minute. There we go. Shoot. There it goes. Okay, so that's the Windows Phone experience. Now we've heard about other devices out there besides Windows Phone, and so let's take a look at what that might look like.
Oh no.
Not again.
I think you got to expense that receipt a few more times for more equipment.
Yeah, I definitely need to buy some more equipment. All right, let's try this again.
There it is.
There we go. All right, everyone close their eyes.
Don't look.
All right, there we go. All right. Yeah, you always want to choose a really unpredictable password, as you can see that I've done. Okay, so this is what the experience looks like on iPhone. And for iPhone and Android, unfortunately, we won't be able to show you the Android unless you come up and walk around afterwards. But it looks very similar to the iPhone experience. The Android HDMI output is not working for some reason. But given the sharing, I guess, between those two platforms, those experiences have worked very similarly. So they're relatively similar experiences. So let's take a look at what the add expense experience would look like on an iPhone. So I just click here to add expense. And notice that we've picked styling and navigation that is more consistent with what iPhone users would expect. So this would look like a typical iPhone app, I think. So we click add expense here, and if I'm going to go select a date, notice that now we're just using a typical iPhone date picker, right? So let's make this one, let's say this one was just yesterday, so I'll just change the date here, and then I'll enter an amount. Anybody want to do the iPhone amount? Who did? What's that? 60. Awesome. Okay. Okay, that's lunch at the Hyatt. All right. So I'll select a category here. In fact, let's make that one. We can choose a different category. Let's make that one. And you see here the picker that's going to be more similar to what you would see on an iPhone. So let's make that a taxi ride, and I'll just put that was a cab. And again, we want to capture the image. So I'll just hit receipt. And here I'm using, of course, the native function, the phone function in the iPhone, which I always have to remember how to do it. There we go. So that captured that photo. Looked like that was a reasonable facsimile of the receipt. And I'll go ahead and I'll save that. Oh, that's interesting.
He's on Wi-Fi.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, David will fix that while we continue. See, so that was a hard question. All right. Okay. So you can see what that would look like on the iPhone. Do you want to connect that up for the rest of the demo? Okay. So now we have both Windows Phone, iPhone experience, as well as Android to do receipt capture. So let's continue on in the rest of the process. Okay, so let's say that I want to actually complete my expense report. And so now what I've done is just launched the Windows 8 application. So this is the Dynamics AX Expenses app. And you can see here that it's going to give me some key information, like the number of new expenses. You can see here a little BI object that shows where things are at in the pipeline. One of the things we hear from users is it's always really good to know, when I'm going to get paid or how much outstanding I have and what state it's in. And so you can see how much state that's in. And you can see that I've been expensing that receipt quite a few times. And then I could look, I can see here expenses reports in different states, whether it be all the way from draft and review, rejected, approved, through process for payment. I can sort this by date if I want, if I just want to see, okay, how those things look in date order. I go back to status. I can also do this little pivot here and look at the unreconciled expenses. All right, so we see the expenses that we've captured that show up here. Here's that $42 one that we entered a minute ago. Here's a view of that receipt, taken right before your very eyes. So those are the set of unreconciled expenses in the existing expense reports. So let's take a look at an existing report and see what that might look like. So this one's built out to show a lot of the different categories. And so everything from car rental to conferences to flight and so forth. So it might be representative of the type of expenses I would incur if I were traveling to tech conference. And this is viewed by category. I can touch each of these tiles and I get a little more drill down of information. I can again go easily view the receipt. So here I get to take a look at what that receipt looked like. I can rotate it or remove it, whatever needs to be done. One view that came directly from user feedback was the notion of, hey, I'd love to be able to see my expenses a week at a glance. And so here's what my travel week looked like. Here's how my expenses lined up. I don't really see anything on Friday. I must have spent something on Friday. Where's that information? Again, I can pop over and look at the detail of each of these and so forth. And as I take a look at these, if I want to go edit, I now pop in and get an edit experience where I am able to look at the information, make changes, attach receipts, and so forth. So if I pop onto this one has a receipt attached already. Here's that receipt we saw earlier. You can take a look at that. And if I need to add an existing expense, it's very easy to do that. So I'll go back here. And let's go back to the front, and we can actually choose some expenses to create our own new expense report. So I can start a couple different ways. So one approach I can take is to just capture a bunch of different receipts and transactions and go and include those on an expense report. And if I do that, I just hit New Expense Report. I give the purpose, let's see, Tech Conference Demo, and create it. And you can see now I've got an expense report created, and let's say that that's all I needed to do. I could go ahead and just submit that expense report for payment. You see that we have a little bit of breakdown. You see what the breakdown between meal and taxi was, and I will go ahead and submit that. All right. And now you can see that this one that I just created went into interview, and we'll be able to take a look at that a little bit later. So let's just pause there, and we wanted to just take a little questions interactively as appropriate. Any questions about the expenses flow and the expenses apps at this point? Yes? What's that? Oh, yeah, project. Yes, you can do that. In the edit entry, you can expose a project and choose that. They're also in the header. If you just use the functions at the header, you can choose a customer as well from your customer list. Yeah. And so that would be similar to the EP experience. That was in the inside of an expense report. You can either choose a customer at the header, or line by line you can choose a specific project. So, yeah. Okay, a couple more. Yeah.
What's the primary driver of the limited experience on the phone, which could, I assume it has to be connected online for you to recreate an expense. Why not just have a mobile enterprise portal?
Okay, yeah, that's good questions. The question is, why just do capture? And the second question is, can you capture offline? And so for expense capture, you can capture those expenses offline, and then when your phone's connected back up, those will sync back up to Ax. So it does have that offline capability. The reason that we didn't just do an EP page here is that the goal is really to go for a very targeted, immersive, high quality, and really a targeted user experience. And that was really the goal for these companion apps. And so that's the reason. Okay, cool. All right, and we're available afterwards if there are, we'll have some time at the end for additional questions. So let's move ahead. All right, so that was just a quick look at expenses, and now we're going to take a look at, oops, looks like we go back to the beginning there. Okay, that's exciting. Sorry about that, we'll figure that out. Okay, and so then the next area that we want to talk about are timesheets. So again, let's start our experience with the phone. And we go back to our apps, and we go back to the timesheet pivot. So timesheet, of course, is tied to projects. And so for people who are on projects and want to capture their project time or get to capture their project time, we create a mobile experience so that you can do that on either the phone or the tablet. So just a quick look in here. You can see now I've got some existing timesheets. So if I want to take a look at this one, I drop in here, and I can start to see here a week at a glance the time that I've entered. So you can see I've captured a few time entries for this week, and if I continue to scroll up, I get to a previous week. Now notice that this week is actually in review, so that one's already been submitted for approval, so I can't really change that one, but I could obviously make a change or add a new time entry here. So I'll add it was kind of Friday, so probably for me that's a typical 4-hour day. And then determine which project it was and so forth. And if I need to I can add more details, like maybe that was design work, and I won't give that one activity. Whoop, hang on. Oh, that was interesting. So I guess we have a little connectivity bug going on. There we go. Okay. All right, let's go back, see if we can recover. All right, here we go. Okay, back to my 4-hour day. Choose the project. And if I go ahead and save that, that's just going to save that entry into my timesheet. And if I'm finished, I can actually submit this from my phone. But I'm actually going to switch over and take a look at it on the other phone. All right, are we happy now?
Not quite.
Okay, the Wi-Fi's not working on that one.
Doesn't seem to be.
Okay. All right, so we are having some fun with connectivity.
Still doesn't seem to be able to see the service.
Okay. All right. Well, good news was the Windows phone worked. The other two phones are dependent on Wi-Fi, in fairness, and so they're a little unhappy at the moment. Okay, so anyway, similar experience that what you'd see on the iPhone, the ability to enter time and modify that. Let's go to the tablet now and look at the Timesheets application. So here we go. So similar to expense, we see timesheets in a variety of states. We can sort those by date as well. You see that we use different text and color to just to show the different timesheets. If I want to take a look at this timesheet, you can see the one that we just edited. I just added the 4-hour time entry here on the phone. Now I'll go ahead and say, well, actually, it was more like a 6-hour Friday, so we can go ahead and add another entry here, choose a different category, and create that. And now you see we've got that extra item created. If I want to take a look at details, I can see those in a format here. And one thing I noticed, I haven't really added too many comments on here, so let me go ahead and show you that functionality. The internal comment is, let me put the external comment is, so this would be a comment that would be passed on to the customer. So we'll just say, going great. Oh, green. Okay, and then just perchance that, we had just a little different comment internally. Okay, so we might have a little slightly different nuance that we want to share internally versus externally. Whether the project is doomed or whether it's going great. So we have the ability to capture both of those comments. And so if I click Update here and I go back to my details, I see that there's a comment here. So as I pop this little icon, I can see both of those comments that are here on the line. I can also see a breakdown, so I get a good view of my week in terms of how did my week break down in terms of which projects I worked on, which category I worked on. Does this look like anybody's week, by the way? Scattered across a few projects. Does that look familiar at all? Okay. Yeah, does anybody, who uses the? What's the, kind of the typical approach? Like, how many projects a week would typically your folks work on? 1, 10, 20? Okay, so there's quite a range of those. Okay, all right. Okay, so now if this one is good to go, let's say I'm finished, I just go ahead and press submit. Again, you see a little BI breakdown, one last look to see how crazy my week actually was, and I can go ahead and press submit. And at that point, I've just submitted into standard AX workflow. So that's a quick look at what we've done with timesheets. All right, let's go back to our presentation. Okay. All right, so that was that demo, and let's continue on and drill down a little bit further now. Okay, we've shown you a little bit about what we've built, and in some cases those apps will meet targeted need and will be useful and deployable. We know that there's a rich partner and customer set of requirements out there, and we don't propose that we will build all of the apps that are needed in the AX space. So we want to give some insight and encouragement and as much information as we can about how partners and customers and ISVs and so forth will build additional apps that target AX. And we highly encourage, and hopefully people copy and steal and so forth, the patterns that we've used and take good advantage of these patterns. So that's really our goal, as well as the apps that we're shipping. So let's talk a little bit about how we built this. So when we first started looking at the architecture for the applications, there were two key problems that we realized that we needed to solve. The first one was authentication. So you have these applications, these apps, and these devices that are outside corporate network for the most part, but they need identities, and we need a way of identifying who the user is, and how does that map back into AX, and how do we give them, grant them privileges based on their roles and so forth. And we also heard really clearly from customers, and we had the same notion that we don't want to have additional provisioning steps. So it's not like we wanted to create a situation where somebody had to go create some other identity and have a different password and all of that to be able to use these applications. And so we used a targeted approach of leveraging Active Directory. Since those identities already exist, AX is already using those identities, we wanted to just use basically those same, those corporate credentials. And so users don't have to have and need new credentials. And so that was kind of the first decision we made, is that we will leverage AD, and we will use a technology called Active Directory Federation Services, which is it's an add-on. It's an add-on to Windows Server that talks to Active Directory and creates an externally facing endpoint, so that application can actually talk to AD using ADFS. And you'll see a little bit more about the details there. So that was the first thing, was solving authentication identity. The second challenge was, well, we all know that AX today is an on-premises product. In the future, we want to have different options for AX, but currently it's typically in your data center or in some targeted hosted environment. And those applications don't sit on CorpNet. Those devices are out in the public internet. And how do they access AX on premises? And we looked at a number of different options, one of which was, do you create a public-facing endpoint? And we just went through the analysis, discarded that option. We got a lot of feedback that can be quite painful from a security boundary perspective and from having to maintain an externally facing endpoint. The other alternative we explored was taking advantage of the Azure Service Bus capabilities. One of the great capabilities of Azure Service Bus is the ability to relay messages from some endpoint to another endpoint that would be on, for example, from a device that's off premises to an endpoint that's on premises, and we have that endpoint that listens to that service bus, and it basically relays those transactions in a secure way. We'll talk a little bit more about the details. But that was the second architectural decision we made, was that rather than having to create this external-facing endpoint, leave AX largely the way it is, we're going to leverage the service bus to be able to relay those messages from off-premises to on-premises. And so you'll see the details as David dives into that. In fact, we're at that point where he's going to take us through the message flows.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. So I'm going to go through the message flow here. Just step by step. So the first thing that happens is the application actually makes the request to the Active Directory Federation Service, or ADFS. I'm going to use that interchangeably. That's using the user's provided credentials. The ADFS replies with the authentication token or XAML token. So this diagram's a little bit simplified. There's actually another step right here where there's a call made from the application to the access control service. And that's going to reply with a simple web token or SWAT token. That's what's used to authenticate the user against the Azure Service Bus. So at this point, the user has been authenticated against A, the organization via the ADFS, and B, against Azure. So all the subsequent message requests are going to contain both of those to security tokens. And that's what step 3 here is. It's going to include the message and the tokens. The message here is anything from get reference data to create expense or anything else. The Azure Service Bus relays this to the WCF service. This is what we call the connector for mobile applications, or simply connector. And I'm going to jump around those 3 terms a few times. This WCF service strips out the authentication token, verifies that it is indeed the user, and then relays that back all the way to AX. This is using AX's Application Integration Framework, or AIF. So the request is made to AX, and then AX replies, and the message comes all the way back. Now, for every subsequent request, it's not going to go to Active Directory Federation service every time. It's going to store that token as well as the SWAT token. Store those in the application, and then for every request, it's going to use those same tokens until the tokens expire. The expiration is determined by the ADFS. And when it re-gets those tokens, it's going to use the user's stored credentials. Okay. All right, so that was kind of just the overall architecture. But now I'm going to go into more on the client side, how we actually built the apps. So first off, the Windows 8 apps were built using HTML5, JavaScript, and of course CSS, lots of CSS. The early prototypes were XAML and C#, but based on research and the future direction of Dynamics AX, we decided to go with the JavaScript approach. One of the other reasons is because there's an extensive set of third-party libraries that were available. For example, those wonderful charts we saw, that's high charts. We didn't have to build that. That was already available. And another benefit is the potential for cross-platform usage. These apps right now are on Windows 8 and Windows 8.1, but potentially could be on other platforms as well because they're in JavaScript. Speaking of libraries, another library we used extensively was Knockout. And this was to facilitate an MVVM pattern, which enabled us to separate the user experience from the business logic. And the reason this is important is because the user experience is very important when it comes to these applications, more so than ever before. And we want to make sure that was totally separate, the business logic and that experience, so we could react quickly to end user feedback. Another engineering decision we made was to encapsulate all these common libraries into one set for all 3 applications. So we have approvals, timesheet, and expense. They all use the same set of common libraries that we created. For example, all that authentication, that is common between the 3. Data storage also lives in the common libraries. For that, we used IndexedDB. And the reason for that is because of performance and scalability. Both those are very important on these applications. Performance has got to be really, really quick. Along those same lines is caching. Certain data is cached on the application, and then after a given period of time, that data is refreshed automatically without the user having to intervene. You may have seen that we do have an explicit refresh button because we found that users, like myself, kind of like to have an explicit button you can press. But if without that, the application actually does refresh by itself in the background automatically. And that depends on what kind of data it is. So for example, timesheets or project data, you may want to refresh that every day, maybe every week. But things like expense categories, that could be every week, month, whatever. Different expiration policies for different types of data. Go ahead.
Clarify one thing that the specific approach that David's talking about here is referring specifically to the Windows 8 apps, those three
Yeah.
apps. We use similar capabilities for the iOS and Android phone apps as well, with HTML5, JavaScript, and use of existing libraries. So just as a background on that.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm actually going to talk about the phone and Windows 8 apps difference a little bit right here. So what I was going to talk about here is how the data is actually pulled from AX. There's 2 different strategies for the tablet and for the different phone applications. And when I say phone apps, I mean both the Android, iOS, and the Windows Phone. They all use the same pattern. So the Windows 8 app when it pulls the data, it actually pulls header data first, and then lines as needed. But the phones actually pull all the data right at the beginning. And there's pros and cons to each of these methods. First, for the tablet app, the wait doesn't actually go away. The wait time is just kind of spread around, right? Because you have the headers first, and then the lines are sprinkled. The line time is sprinkled around. But the tablets tend to be on Wi-Fi networks. Wi-Fi networks tend to be faster, so we can take this this hit when it comes to the service calls. The phones might be on cellular networks, which don't tend to be as fast, so we didn't want to have the user waiting every time they tapped on a timesheet, for example. And it's just one of the things to think about when it comes to designing these applications. Where do you want to put your wait times? Where do you want to put the service calls? Okay. Anything else on that you wanted to say? No? All right. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about globalization localization. We want to make sure these apps were available to all the different markets that AX is available in, which is around 40 different regions. The apps are globalized based on the device's setting. So for example, if your Surface RT is in the French culture, then all dates, times, etc., that's all going to be in the French fashion. But the localization story is a little bit different. The localization is going to be using the user's AX language. So if they go into Enterprise Portal or the rich client and they see everything in German, they're going to be seeing German language when they open the application as well. That's using locally stored language variables, basically. And this is all to match the application experience, kind of similar to the EP experience, not necessarily when it comes to speed or anything like that, but when it comes to if they're used to seeing all their AX stuff in French, then we want to make sure that it stays in that sort of experience for them. Another thing these apps do is respect Ax metadata. Kyle actually talked a little bit about that when he's talking about the project field. If your organization doesn't use project field, that's hidden in the Enterprise Portal experience, it's also going to be hidden on the applications. Another thing to mention here, when it comes to how these services are designed, the fields hiding, that's more of a configuration type thing. But when it comes to customization, you want to make sure that these services are as thin as possible. We try to get all of the business logic into a common layer in AX. So the services didn't have special logic, and then Enterprise Portal, et cetera, have that also having different special logic. We wanted to have the same logic for both of those things. And that's made possible by common classes and logic down deep in table level methods, for example. Like for timesheet, for budget check, that logic's on the table, and so you get the same budget check logic whether you're going through the phone, going through the tablet, or going through rich client or EP. One other thing to mention is the approval app. I don't think we showed that yet, right? That one actually has, you can approve any workflow element. And I'm going to show you a little bit about how that's configured as well on the AX side to get a custom experience for different customers. OK, let's switch to this guy, number 6. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about this is the mobile connector. So if you remember from that architecture diagram, this is the WCF service that relays from Azure to AX. So the first thing here is this Azure Service namespace and this password. This is what connects the connector to Azure and what enables it to listen against that Azure namespace. Secondly, we have this thumbprint for the XAML token, and this is what is used to authenticate the user. So remember that XAML token comes in the header of the message, and it validates against this token right here to make sure that it is indeed the user. Okay. Thirdly, we have all these different endpoint URIs. Each of these is for a specific module and points to a specific AIF port, and we'll see that in AX in a minute. Each one of these, if you have it entered and it's valid, it opens up a listener against the Azure Service namespace. And so you can see I have something for expense, something for time, but I don't have approvals or email or any of these others. So there's listeners for expense and time, but maybe this organization doesn't use approval at all. One other thing here, let's see what I want to talk about first. Okay. So we have expense and time, but notice there's actually this other endpoint here, config endpoint. Now, there's no specific URI. That's because this config endpoint is kind of special for a couple reasons. One, it doesn't actually talk to AX at all. What it does is it exposes a service version, which services are enabled, and also the ADFS URL here. So real quick, I'll talk about this ADFS URL. This is actually what the application uses for that very first service call, because it has to know where to go get that token. So what happens is the application actually makes a service call first to this connector via an unauthenticated endpoint, gets this ADFS URL, and then uses that to actually get the token. There's no security risk here because there's nothing going against AX, and there's no business data involved here. So now, the other thing, the config endpoint, like I said, exposes version. This is important because of how the applications are actually distributed. This is not how apps are distributed of old. This is, all the time, these apps are constantly updated. And if you're using, for example, Windows 8.1, the apps will even update themselves. So now the app is always the latest version. But your organization may actually not update your connector often, or it could be 2 years old, whatever. So this connector is using version, say, 2 of the timesheet service. But this application that all the users have, everybody, it has, say, version 5 or something. Now the application calls to this config endpoint, gets that version, and now has to behave accordingly. This is how we support backwards compatibility. And the other thing is which services are on and off. So you saw on the phone, there's actually timesheet and there's expense. Well, there's actually 2 different endpoints here. There's expense and time. You may have one off and one on. Now the phone needs to know which ones are on and off, and then, so let's say time is not enabled at all. It hides that time module, and the user only sees expense. Okay. One other thing to mention here is notice that there's not just one place to enter the AOS. So right here is the AOS name, but each one of these can have its own. This allows the connector to support entirely different AX instances at the same time. So you may have one AX that does expense processing and one that does timesheet, and they're totally separate. This connector can support both those instances at the same time. So your user, who may have to go to 2 different enterprise portals for this experience or whatever, they can go to one application on their phone and hit both those instances at the same time. And lastly, there's one little thing here, support email. This is just a little feature we introduced. This could say admin@contoso.com or whatever. And if you look at the phone, that email is exposed. So if the user has any difficulty or has any questions, they can just tap that email and then be able to hit their support people right away. Anything else on that? All right. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to talk about the AX configuration side of things. When it comes to R3, to get these applications working, there's not actually much you need to do when it comes to how this is set up. Here's the inbound ports form. I don't know who's familiar with AIF and who isn't. This is located under System Administration, Setup, Services, and Application Integration Framework, Inbound Ports. So here we have the different ports deployed. There's expense services, there's timesheet services, and that's what corresponds to these over here. Each one of these represents a service group, which in turn contains many services, which in turn contain many service operations. So, for example, go look at service groups. There's expense services, and there's many different services in there for different things. Let's see. If you were to create your own custom services, then they wouldn't be this basic port. They'd actually be what's called an enhanced port. There's not that much difference, but there's one thing I do want to highlight when it comes to difference between basic and enhanced. An enhanced port gives you the ability to set up what's called a trusted intermediary user. And if you have two different AX instances, and they have different BC proxy accounts, you may have to use trusted intermediary to make sure that a BC proxy account on one lines up with that user on the other, so the connector is the one user. Because there has to be the account running the connector service has to be on both those environments. Same with the AX user, by the way, because you can't have them logging into a system they're not part of, right? Okay. Another thing to consider if you're building your own applications against AX is using the query service. Query service is a way to be able to read data only, but you can't write anything to it. If you're to build a more full-fledged experience like what we have here, you'd want these custom services that have the full CRUD capabilities. Yeah. But that also leads back to what I was saying about the thinly designed services. Because we wanted to support many different organizations that have different policies, if an organization has something special for them, they can implement that inside our services right here. So for example, let's say, I don't know, category service. You wanted to have some dynamic list of categories. In the default AX experience, there is no such thing, but if you wanted to customize that, you could, and our apps would support it. But that's all part of how the services are designed, keeping them as thin as possible, and also keeping as much business logic outside of the client as possible, which is not always the easiest thing to do. Okay, so that's kind of talking about customization, but configuration. This is a configuration experience for the Approvals app. Like the Expense app that can hide and show fields, Approvals app, because it supports so many different approval elements, we want to be able to have a different configuration for different types of approvals. So you can change for, let's say, whatever this is here, advanced ledger entry. You don't want it to be orange, you want it to be pink or something. So now it's going to show up on the tablet as a pink tile for all ledger entries. And you can also customize, configure, tiles, descriptions, and that appears on this tile on the home page. But then when you actually tap into it, you can get different fields for more details for the approver. One last thing the Approvals has is report association. You can actually associate different SSRS reports to each one of these approval elements. And so now you're not even bound to the UI we have on the tablet. You can create whatever report you want to, and that's going to be available for the approver. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I guess you got to switch back to the other one.
Okay, good. Thanks, David. So, a lot of good detail about what was going on behind the scenes in terms of how we built the apps, use of the on-premises connector service, as well as what we did inside of AX. And we're happy to answer follow-up questions as well. So as we wanted to come back to just show you some of the rest of the investment, let's go do a little bit of approvals. So I want to go to the let's go to the approval application here, the Windows 8 app. So when I launch the Approvals app, you'll see it is of the same family as Expense and Timesheets. It's very similar in terms of its layout and presentation. You can see important things like, hey, we've got 5 pending approvals. And now, instead of showing things in different states, now I'm showing different document types because, we don't, there could be any number of types of approvals that come to me if I'm a project manager or a practice manager or who knows what role I'm playing. And so I can take a look at these. I can look at these by submitter. Like, for example, if there's somebody I need to really pay attention to, and they've been hounding me to get things approved, I understand that. We could look at kind of an aging and say, okay, how old is this stuff getting that I haven't been paying attention to? And then I can look at pending approvals or my recent approvals. I have a view of taking a look at that as well. So let's just do a drill down. So we can take a look at this expense report. So this was a report that was submitted previously, and I get to see a bit of detailed information. Now, we did a kind of an immersive experience, largely to show things that are possible, I think, with some of the great capabilities we have nowadays. We did a deep experience for expense and for timesheets, and so you'll see kind of a more immersive experience. It's a great richer set of capabilities. For some of the other workflows, we'll rely on the attached report. So even though we didn't build the deep experience in the app, the user can still get all the information that they need based on a report that's created that's attached to that workflow. So we think that gives a pretty nice extensibility for the application. So here you see a couple of expenses. You can see some details here. I can pop in and take a look, and here's again the view of the receipt. See there, I've expensed it once again, and so you can see fairly good amount of detail. And when I'm ready to go, I can just simply hit approve and provide my comments. Or even more fun is rejecting. I don't know who enjoys rejecting. Anybody here? Yeah, it's kind of a fulfilling experience for me anyway. And so to be able to approve or reject, and then I'm done. I move on. That one would go away. If I pop over to the timesheet experience, I can see timesheet that I had submitted previously. Let's see. Let's take a look at the one that I looked at here. So here you take a look at this timesheet we created earlier. We can see that breakdown. We can see, same comments here. The project is still doomed, sadly, and see what information I have here. We have a nice summary like the user saw when they submitted this. So as a project manager, I can take a look here and see what's going on by project, by category. Thankfully this was 100% billable. So that was good news. And I can also take a look at the project impact and see, okay, as I approve this, what kind of impact is this going to have on the various projects that are being called out here in the timesheets. And so that gives me an idea of what's happening from an impact perspective. And again, I can approve or, even more fun, of course, reject that entry. And so this is a really very flexible app that can be used wherever workflow is used. So, so we think that's a good capability that can be added, especially to that user that needs to handle this on their tablet, may not always be in the office, but needs enough context to be able to be successful. One last capability on approvals we wanted to talk about, and it leverages this architecture, although it's not a specific app, is email approval. So we also have extended the capability of workflow. So in base AX, for some time you had the ability to generate an email saying you have something you need to approve. And repeatedly we get the feedback like, well, that's great to tell me I have something I need to approve. There's a lot of times I know what that is, I have enough context, just let me approve it through that email. And so that's what we've enabled with email approval. Whoop, you get to see my settings there. All right, so let's pop into one of my email accounts here. You can see that I now have a couple of approval emails that have come in. This was that expense report that we created, that $150 expense report a few minutes ago. And so you can see here in the subject line that this is for Kyle, and here's the expense number, and you can see that this was for a demo at Tech Conference, and I can either approve or reject that. And you see a fair amount of information. The information that's expressed here is information that's available in workflow instructions. And so there are some placeholders, and so I completely crafted this information, this message with this information in it as I defined the workflow. And so you can you have full flexibility. So as you're defining workflow instructions, you can put any text in there. You can put warnings in there, or caveats, or reminders, or whatever you want to do. The other thing that can happen here, since we're using workflow, and you can also use the conditional logic of workflow. So let's say that you had a policy that said, well, we're comfortable with email approval for things that are $1,000 or less, but we'd rather use the standard approval processes for things that are more than $1,000. So you can use conditional logic of workflow to submit different workflow instructions for those two branches of logic. And that would be a capability as well, because since we're just leveraging workflow. So if I want to hit this one, let's reject this one. That's always cool. I've been expensing that same receipt over and over again. I've finally been caught. So let's just say that we want to reject that. So what's happening now, since the app is not on premises, but AX is, we're again leveraging the service bus, a little bit different way, but we're leveraging the service bus. That URL that was in the email actually resolved against the service bus, and so it used that relay capability. The connector saw that, understands what that workflow action was. Based on a unique URL, it knew what to do to approve that action. And so if I were to go back now into the approvals app, for example, that one would drop off the list because it's already been approved. So we found that that's become a pretty flexible capability for a couple of reasons. One is that it works across all devices, all email clients. Any email client would work. And so it works on, it could be a convenient feature for somebody who's at their desktop even, all the way down to any mobile device. It's a really rich capability. There you go. So that kind of rounds out the set of applications that we wanted to showcase today. So let me go back to our trusty slides here, and we can finish up. All right. Okay. All right. The other thing, one great question is, okay, how do we find out all this information? So the best source is we've created a mobile apps page on Partner Source, or available on Partner Source or Customer Source. So if you search for mobile apps or Dynamics AX Mobile or something like that, you'll come to this page, and there's a wealth of information there. You can see links to the apps. You can see the information on the connector. You can see the links off to the developer information. And for the developer information, we've provided some walkthrough document that explains how we built the applications, how we built the connector. We've provided some sample code for that. We also have sample projects that can be downloaded from MSDN's code gallery. So we're trying to bootstrap those customers, partners, and ISVs that are trying to build their own applications. And we have some partners that are at various points along that process. There's the information about email approval. There's a link to our blog, which is helpful. We try and, as we get questions and other things come in, we'll post that on the blog. For example, one concern that's come back from the field is the cost of using Service Bus. And so I've done a blog post out there that has all the detail about how much it would cost. And so if you were doing 20 to 40,000 expense reports a month, that's something that would be measured in the tens of dollars per month, for example. So not a significant cost, but it's helpful to know that and to be able to explain that. So we've got information out there. We have information on our developer story and so forth. So we'll continue to post on the blog. And so if you have things that need to be posted out there, or you have questions, please feel free to bring those on. Also, our support channel, just like any other parts of AX, other features of AX, is up to speed and able to support you in the mobile application. So if there are questions about configuring the connector or configuring ADFS or so forth, our support folks are now up to speed on that. There are obviously things that they find out they need to come back to us for, but they're increasingly good at helping to support that. I would make one last, provide one last piece of information that we're seeing quite often, an issue that we see, which has to do with Adfs configuration. Let me just get a sample. Who here has familiarity with using Adfs? Okay. All right, so that's good. There's some level of familiarity. Some people, they're not as familiar with that. One of the key pieces of Adfs configuration is that it is an SSL endpoint, and so it requires an SSL certificate. And with any SSL certificate, that needs to be issued from a third party, cert authority, based on the URL that you're using. And so we've had a lot of issues, for example, with folks that are trying to install ADFS, and they'll just go grab a self-signed cert, which is fine for signing and those kinds of things. But when it comes to actually enabling SSL, a real SSL endpoint, you have to have an SSL cert from a third-party CA. And if you don't, what will happen is the app will go, wait a minute, I can't do this. I can't talk to this URL because I need SSL. And without a valid SSL cert, that SSL interaction with ADFS will fail. So just a quick note on that. So anyway, set of references out there and blog site and so forth. So please take advantage of that information and let us know what additional information is needed. We'd love to get that feedback. So at this point, I think we have about 15 minutes left. So we'd like to just reserve that for questions, comments, and so forth. Yes?
Mr. Fleming, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One for you and one complicated.
Oh, good. Yeah, let's do the easy one first, make me look good, and then.
The easy one being, what are your thoughts on the purpose of doing these kinds of apps? Is it like we want to showcase the technology and enable you guys to do more of this, or are you actually going to further develop and maintain and support and do
Yep.
more
Okay.
inside these apps?
Okay, yeah, let's take that question, then we'll do the follow-up. Okay, the question is, what's our purpose for the apps that we've developed and launched in the marketplace? We have multiple purposes. One purpose was to prove out this pattern and be able to provide that guidance not only to our internal use, but to external teams. And that's why we want to communicate that pattern. So it's a proof point. The other part is to explore and kind of set an expectation about what ERP apps can be like with these great new device experiences, right? So who would have thought of doing expense reports with a beautiful app like that a few years ago? So we wanted to help kind of change the mindset that we can have great business apps that take advantage of all of the it can be like the cool consumer apps. We can take advantage of those patterns and those experiences and so forth. So that was the other part of it. And then the third part of it is that we believe that there will be targets where those apps will meet customer needs. In and of themselves, the ones we ship will meet customer needs. And we already have customers who are deploying those apps for their purposes. So I guess those are probably the top three reasons why we did it. Yep.
So David, what's the customization story behind this? I mean, most AX implementations have a level of customization. And what do you need? What do you do if that field that needs to show up?
Right, yeah, so there's a level of customization we support, and there's a level of customization that we don't support. And if you have many different new fields and they're all required upon entry, yeah, these apps aren't going to support it at this time. But if you have a way to perhaps default those fields, like 90% of the time that field is value A, then you can put that business logic into the AIF service layer, default that field, and then perhaps if for some reason that data doesn't conform, then you can just reject subsets of data outright. So yeah, there's levels to that.
Yeah.
So you're not going to sort of open source the Java and script code and things like that.
The entire app we haven't decided to open source that. We have given some samples so that around the base functions, I should say. I mean, you won't see a starter kit that looks exactly like that app. It'd be interesting to get your feedback on that, of how valuable that would be and how that could be leveraged. So if you want to, it'd be great to give us, send us back that feedback on, what kind of things would be helpful, if it were open sourced or something like that.
That will be very helpful.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
At least begin with a decent framework.
Okay.
Have like a template on how to start building apps to have the security control and all that stuff already in place.
Okay.
It's pretty obvious that you're using a particular layout.
Right.
UI, UX for developing apps, so it makes sense that partners and ISPs are doing the same.
Yeah. Okay.
To have templates and best practices on that,
Okay. Yeah, have you taken a look at what we have so far?
Doing it right now.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it'd be great to take a look at where we started, and then give us feedback on, what additional areas would be most useful. Okay, good.
Although it doesn't seem to be found on the foreign source and other source.
Okay. Yeah, I see it on both places, but yeah. Anyway, we can take a look with you on that. Maybe we should come up. Should everybody come up to the mic? I guess would be the best thing if you have a question, if you don't mind. Is that the best way to capture it, or? Yeah, so make sure we get it on the audio. Okay. Yeah, come on up.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, go for it.
I have two questions over here. One is that, is there a best practices, or is there a practice which has been laid out, or a guideline for the development of these applications?
So the question is there a best practice around developing the apps?
Yeah.
We have published a walkthrough document that describes, I guess that would describe those best practices in terms of here's how you do, here's how we did at least, or here's how we recommend you do authentication, here's how you do, how you use the service bus, how you formulate your messages, here's how we built the connector for the apps we ship, and so you can do similarly.
Yeah, the second question is related to the first question. Is there a roadmap to get it integrated with LCS?
A roadmap the question is there a roadmap to get integrated with LCS? Can you say a little bit more about that? What would that look like?
Basically, when we look at the code analysis, today code analysis is exclusively on AX. Is there something to get it integrated with LCS?
Well, so the services, which all show up in LCS, right? That part, the AX part of it. So you're asking more about the actual app itself?
Yep.
Okay. No. Well, yeah. No. That's a good question. I guess we haven't thought enough about that. So that is a really good question about how it relates to LCS. We might make a point here about we didn't talk about telemetry.
That's true.
Yeah. Do you want to just give a quick highlight on what we've done there?
Sure. So yeah, we have telemetry integrated with the connector, and we also have telemetry integrated with the Windows 8 applications. And then we can see various anonymous usage through Dev Analytics.
Yeah, Dev Analytics is the Azure-based service capability, and so we basically just tied into that. Okay, good. Yeah, next.
You mentioned that the apps respect the security that are on the fields. Does it also respect the mandatory flag? For example, if you want to make the project mandatory?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any sort of AX business logic like that, that's all respected. And since the apps are acting, I should say the connector is acting on behalf of the user that's logged in, all the security and everything else is just as if that user was calling the service directly.
The question is, do you need to use ADFS and Azure? For the apps that we ship out of the box, it does require both ADFS and Azure. We've talked to customers and partners who say, well, I'm going to write an application, let's say for my warehouse, where I know I'm on CorpNet and so forth, and so you wouldn't need those pieces, right? You could simply authenticate against AIF using an existing credential that's on the client at that point, if it were on CorpNet, for example. Pardon me? Well, yeah, and that's actually what we do. We are using claims-based authentication. It just happens to be that the apps that we're shipping are expecting the claim that comes, that SAML token that comes from ADFS, and it uses that claim in order to be able to access the service bus as well. And then when that claim comes back to the connector, it opens up that claim. As Dave was pointing out, it uses the signature on that claim to unwrap that and say, oh, that actually is Kyle Y at Microsoft.com. I know who that user is. So we are using claims-based in the approach that we've implemented. Okay. So yeah. Yes.
If someone were to have email approval set up, but they went and approved it from the app instead, would those links be disabled? Like,
Yeah.
if they tried to activate, say, approve from email, but forgot to put it already?
Right. The question is, yeah, so you're using both the app and email, and you got an email, but you didn't use the email. You went to the app and you did approve. What would happen is when you went to the email, you'd click on the link, and it would say, this is already this action's already been taken. So it wouldn't happen again, and you'd go, oh yeah, I guess I already approved that. So, yep. Okay. Yes.
What is the roadmap for the next few years with regards to new apps and functionality?
Okay. The question is, what's the roadmap in terms of apps and functionality? From the services industry's perspective, where we come from, we for the AX 2012 line, I don't think that we will spawn, or at least not on our roadmap, to spawn a bunch of new apps. We have a list of enhancements to these apps that we're focused on at this point. As we look at, Hal talked a little bit about version 7 of Rainier, or version 7 of AX. We will look at additional apps that will make sense as we continue to grow the product. And so from this area, from at least our perspective, I wouldn't expect that we would grow the app footprint significantly in the next year or so. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Okay.
We got one.
Oh, one. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Sure.
I have a feeling that we'll see a lot more JavaScript done in the AXC going forward. Are you considering also using TypeScript?
So the Windows 8 apps.
The question is, since we're using JavaScript, would we use TypeScript?
The answer is yes, we already do.
Yeah.
We do use those for the Windows 8 apps.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you for attending. Be sure to give us an evaluation. If you need help filling that out, come by and we'll help you find the highest scores. And thanks again for joining us.